Oh, good to see you again.
Good to see you too. How are things with you guys? Good?
Good.
Well, we've just had a very dramatic thing that our younger daughter, who, by the way, was one of the hatchlings in Mars Needs Mums, just had turned out she never had wisdom teeth, and then she was having real problems with one of her ears constantly bunging up and extreme pain and kind of rushing sounds and stuff. And so she swapped dentists, and they did a 3D scan of her jaw and discovered she actually has a wisdom tooth, one wisdom tooth that was up, actually digging its way into one of the sinuses in her upper jaw.
Ooh.
And so she's just been in this morning and had that carved out. So she's large.
She's lying on the couch watching TV, and she's a bit, but she's okay.
So yeah, bit of drama, but other than that, we're doing very well at the moment.
Well, that sounds painful. I hope she recovers pretty quickly, but dramas are all part of life, right? So
yeah.
Well, I'm really glad to have you guys here, and I'll give you a little bit of context about my connection with Mars Needs Moms. Nothing too big, but I remember when my kids, now they're 13 and 11, when they saw it maybe about 5-6 years ago, or like when they were really young, like 4 and 5. I didn't, I watched it, but I didn't understand it as I understood it when I watched it again yesterday. Especially being a parent of a teen, like understand in the sense like all those little things that, especially in the opening of the film that you guys had, like that relationship of mom and son, and TV, and you can't do this, and mom, you're mean, and all that stuff. I completely like related to that at a very personal level, and I think every parent does. So that was really, put together and written really, really well, because it literally felt, like I was talking to my kids, or my wife was talking to my kids. So that was really, really well done.
Our kids were 11 and 9.
Yeah, I think it must have been. Yeah, so it was.
So we were living that
very much lifted from our life. Yeah.
No, I could tell. I mean, it seemed very personal, and so bravo on that. And I just want to get started in terms of how did you guys get onto this project? I know there's a book based on it. Just kind of start me with the evolution. Wendy can start, or Simon, or you guys can interject, whichever way you want.
I was the connection into this because actually I used to be with the agency Endeavour, and because I hadn't done anything for many years, they were getting bored of having me on the books, and so they dumped me. And I then was sort of looking around to try and get a new agent, and landed with APA and David Saunders. And David just basically said, okay, I'm going to contact everybody who's ever met or worked with Simon and see if I can, land him a gig. And so one of the people he'd phoned up was Steve Starkey, who's longtime partner with Bob Zemeckis and Jack Rapke in Image Movers. And
Right.
And Steve hadn't taken the call because he'd been busy, but it'd been put onto the bottom of his list of, people to call back. Everyone carries around a card that has things I need to do today. And so at the time, Bob and the gang were setting up Image Movers Digital to do mocap movies primarily for Bob, but then they also realized, oh, wait a minute, we need to have a movie to go in between each of Bob's movies to keep the whole crew going. And so they planned this thing with Mars Needs Mums, and they got the script in and really hadn't liked it at all. Bob had really been unhappy about it. And so they were having kind of a crisis meeting because they're just about to roll into production on Christmas Carol, and they've got to have something that's going to be ready in a year's time to take on the crew. And so Bob says, we're just going to have to get we need a writer director, someone who's going to come in, write the thing, and carry it through. So I don't know, anyone got any good ideas? And they're all kind of like, looking at their shoes and thinking, what the hell? And Steve looks down at his list and goes, what about Simon? Because I'd worked with Bob on Back to the Future and also storyboarded a bunch of stuff on Polar Express. And actually, at the time, Bob had said, "Simon, this is the best. You've got to make one of these movies. This motion capture is so much fun." And so, so Steve looks at his list and goes, "What about Simon?" And Bob goes, "That's it. Get Simon. Right, solved." and so I had a meeting with Jack Rapke, and I said, "Well, if I can get to write it, I'd like to do it." We then went through a horrendous period of coming up with basically a story outline and pitching it to Bob, and Bob just hating
it. Yeah. And we'd have to drive up to
Carpinteria
to do
which is
it.
near Santa Barbara.
So there's like an hour drive up there where you're just like, "Oh my God, is it any good? Is it any good?" And then you drive back and you're like, "Oh God, it was rubbish. It was rubbish. It was rubbish."
And we went through about 3 or 4 of those.
Yeah.
And eventually Bob said, "Look, just pitch me like I'm some actor that you've met in an elevator and you really want them to do the movie, but you've got about 3 floors of elevator ride to pitch the movie. So really, I just want 8 salient points.
Yeah.
And that's it."
And we pulled a bunch of photographs and pictures off the internet as well, so that we could make like a lookbook of what we thought it should look like. So we just went in with a bunch of boards and, like 5 points, and this is what we're going to do. And you went, "Yeah, do that."
And suddenly it was like, "Oh, okay. All right." So we just started writing. That was in 2007, I think. End of 2007.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you guys started writing, and see, that's the thing that it's different when 2 people are working like as directors or writers, but especially as a couple, right? There's it always has its benefits, obviously, but it also could have its drawbacks. How did that drawbacks, not in sense of like writing, but more so you're basically right there next to each other as all the time and working together. And how was that like, Wendy, if you want to answer that, like in terms of writing the script, and since it was your first time too, and working with Simon I think
we'd written a bunch of stuff.
We'd written.
You had.
Yeah.
Because on the end of Time Machine, I realized I didn't know what was wrong with the story or how to fix it. And so I realized I need to sit down and start writing stuff. And
so we'd been writing.
Just from about 2002, 2003, we've been writing stuff. A lot of very bad scripts, it has to be said.
Well, they never got picked up, so I guess they were bad. I liked a few of them.
Not necessarily, but let's go back then when you guys started working together, like that evolution in the beginning of working together. Obviously, be having kids too at the same time, but working together and writing together. What was that like, Wendy?
I think actually working together, because we've been married so long, we kind of worked out how to criticize each other without actually doing damage or causing too much pain. So we were able. Yeah, shut up. So we were able to yes and rather than no, that's not very good. So that there's a way of building on an idea that is what you're giggling.
Constructive. I just mean it's sentences that start with or
yes, but yeah. So there are ways to communicate that we've already worked out. There's sort of pathways that we've already got laid in.
We kind of joked we've been married for so long we'd run out of things to argue about.
So we had to start writing.
That's a good thing. That's really a good thing, because it does. I think it does taking a used to working together, as well. Just because it's a completely different dynamic, and some people it works really, really well, and for some people it doesn't. Well, whatever for whatever reason that is. But Wendy, when you started writing with Simon, if you can remember, any kind of a story of a scene that you guys were developing or a dialogue, and how you guys kind of played with that while working with each other. And it doesn't have to be for a Mars Need Moms or anything else that you work, where you incorporated your own personal element in it and had a discussion with Simon back and forth and worked about it.
As I tend to overwrite, So I'll write all sorts of details and, you know, what they were thinking and all this kind of thing. And then I hand it over to him and I think this is really good. This is great. I'm really proud of this.
She's written about 4 pages.
And I hand it over to him and he goes, this is good, but we can get rid of this bit and this bit and this bit. And he chunks it down until it's like half a page. I'm like, wow, I spent days on that. And it's now half a page. But it was so much better because
it was very concise and nice though.
Yeah. And then there was one time we were driving, we'd been up and had a meeting with Bob on Mars, and this whole thing about the helmet, because Gribble had to have a helmet that he could put on his mum when he rescued her, and he's coming out of the spaceship, and Bob's like, I don't know how you're going to solve this.
And it was specifically about we got Milo and his mum out there in the middle of the wilderness.
That's
and there's
right.
only one helmet.
Yes, I
and
knew there had to
mum
be a
gives
second
a helmet to Milo. Everybody else is trapped inside the control thing.
I knew we had to plant a
and
helmet.
so it's like we're one helmet down, and somewhere we've got to find another helmet from.
And that we're in the meeting, and this answer just pops into my head, and I'm like, I'm not going to say that because I haven't had time to think it through. And Simon and Bob are just going to go, no, that's rubbish, shut up. And so I say if I know. Well, Bob would have.
Yeah.
So I sit on it, and then we're driving home, and I was thinking, oh, I'm going to pitch it to Simon while we're driving. So I pitch it, and he goes, yeah,
that works.
That works.
Yeah.
Why didn't you say that in the meeting?
You'd have looked so smart.
Is it because I mean Simon has worked with Bob before, and you know he is, and for you was it more of like a, not necessarily intimidating, but was it just something that you were not used to?
It was totally, I was so not used to it. Yeah, I mean, you know, I was little old me, and all of a sudden I'm in meetings with Bob Zemeckis, and I grew up watching his movie. Yeah, I was trying hard not to geek out. And so, yeah, I think I was a little bit starstruck, and you know, how can my silly ideas work or be any good? But apparently,
yeah, no, I mean, Bob is actually
is
a very good development executive. Actually, he's very good at reading stuff. I mean, he's taught screenwriting and so on. So, you know, he can look at a thing and go, okay, you've got this. I mean, there was one time early on in the story, he said, okay, I see why parents are going to want to watch this movie, and I see why little boys are going to want to watch this movie. Why are girls going to want to watch this movie? You need some sort of aspirational, teenage, kind of rebellious female character in this as well. I don't know how you guys are going to do that.
Off you go, fix it.
So he was very good at like not producing the answer. He'd specify the problem and be very good and clear at that. And then, I mean, one of the things that's awful is when you work with executives who then try and provide the answer. And I remember a great quote about Jeffrey Katzenberg, which is, you know, he's a wonderful person to bring into the editing room to tell you what's wrong with your movie. Just get him the hell out of the editing room before he tells you what to do about it. and Bob was very good at not doing. I mean, he'd throw out a suggestion. I mean, remember the whole thing with the third act?
Yes.
Because he had, I've done a whole bunch of third act constructions for DreamWorks, doing DreamWorks animated movies, storyboarding, where you're essentially writing the construction of the thing as well. So I thought I knew third acts, you know, I could do this. And we come to our third act and we put it together, and Bob says, you know, this is just kind of arbitrary.
Oh, we lost sleep over that word for months.
What does that mean? And he said, you know, you're just kind of like, you're rolling down a road here until you just tell me it's time to turn off. I don't know where I'm supposed to be getting to. I don't know when I'm supposed to be there. You know, you've got to give me, the structure of this thing. And so,
ticking clock.
God damn it, ticking clock, and you know, and geography and all those kind of things. All right, it was so he kind of thrown out some ideas, and we noted all down and gone away, and then we'd had a couple of days of like,
we tried hard to build his ideas into what we got.
Work.
It
doesn't work. Okay.
Oh no, Bob's ideas don't work. What are we going to do?
So we kind of laid out our reasons why it didn't work, and then we also kind of laid out another board of what we thought could work. and we're going to have a lunchtime meeting with him, because by now he's actually shooting Christmas Carol. But we get a lunchtime meeting with him, and we come in and say, so that the thing we talked about last time, it kind of, he goes, oh, I hope you came up with something better than that shit. I was like, oh yeah, okay, yes, we have this board here.
Yeah,
it's interesting. Sorry, go on.
He just, it just been a thing he'd come up with off the top of his head. So he was realistic about how you guys are the writers, where all the levers and buttons are in this script. I don't, so it's better if I just tell you what you need to achieve and you figure out how to do it.
I think it's that syndrome of him being a filmmaker, and I was talking to William Deere, who directed Harry and the Hendersons. I don't know if you've seen that from the 80s. And Spielberg came into the editing room, and he gave him some suggestions, and so he's like, you want me to do this? Or he's like, well, it's your film, you do it, you do whatever you want to. I'm just here to tell you what to do, what I think, but you make that decision. And I think that comes with that part of being a filmmaker. And executives who are not filmmakers, they don't understand, not all of them, but most of them don't understand necessarily how painful it can get when somebody's on your head all the time and telling you what to do, what not to do, and it becomes micromanagement, right? So
yeah.
And you have to spend a lot of time trying to educate people about story and why that isn't going to work. It's a big waste of time and effort.
Yeah. So now that you have went through writing a script together, were you guys simultaneously starting pre-production in terms of like casting or looking at obviously motion capture technology, which is something completely new? It still is relatively new, but at the time it was very, very new. Was that simultaneously? If so, how did you guys go through that together, or was it afterwards?
Oh yeah, we set up offices actually because they had a motion capture stage that they built specially for Christmas Carol, but for the ongoing Image Movers digital films. And actually, it's in the same area. Literally, the next door building was where Spielberg was shooting Tintin.
And we were just across the road from where
shooting Avatar. And a lot of the same crew people as well. That we had a lot of the Avatar crew on our show. Who were the same crew who worked on Christmas Carol. So it's a very incestuous world. But yeah, so we had our offices set up there, and every time we take a break from writing, we soldier away for an hour or two, and then we go and hang out on set and watch what was going on. So we were kind of educating ourselves about how motion capture worked, how the kind of rhythm of the day worked, and getting to know a whole bunch of the people who we would be inheriting. And
also Scott and Victoria set up. Scott Boland and Victoria Burrows. So they did casting, and they set up offices.
Oh, they had offices there as well.
So we could just walk down to them. So yeah, it was great. Everybody was on the same campus.
Yeah, and they'd show us videos of people, and actually it had been Seth was. I can't remember why, but Seth came around. Oh, I think he was pitching a show to the guy who was the head of development for Image Movers at the time, who went on before Jackie went on to run Hasbro, and I can't remember what his name is. Sorry, but so Seth had come in to pitch an idea to him as like a film or TV show, and so we kind of met Seth and just were hanging out, chatting to him, and then we kind of looked at each other and went, you know what? He's kind of exactly the kind of personality we want Milo to have. And so we said, would you consider playing like a 9-year-old boy? And he was really into the idea. I thought that's because I think from an acting point of view, getting to play someone who doesn't necessarily look like you do, and yet you also get to embody the physicality of that is really exciting.
It was great because he was mocap and he knew that his actual image wasn't going to be on camera. He turned up for the first day of shooting and he'd got his head shaved and a bright blue mohawk.
He said, when am I ever going to get to do this? At any other time in my professional career, I've got like a 3-month period when I can get away with having this hair.
That's
It was rather intimidating,
it
actually.
was. Everybody went, it's okay, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter.
That's so cool. Simon, I was just thinking about this earlier today that, you've directed 3 films, right? 1 co-directed and the other 2, Time Machine and Mars Needs Moms. And all 3 of them are very different, not in terms of just story, but in terms of technology that you use, right? One is
I've actually directed 5.
You did
5.
Balto?
Okay.
No,
You
no,
directed We're Back. Yeah.
6 films.
Way
Yeah,
back.
but there was
Fievel.
Fievel, then We're Back,
Yes.
which I'm not to talk about.
Yeah.
Also, then Time Machine and
Yes.
Mars.
And Prince of Egypt.
And Prince of Egypt. Yeah, so that's
Right.
6.
So let's talk about Fievel and We're Back and Prince of Egypt. Let's say you have Fievel and you have We're Back, a dinosaur story. They're very traditional animation. So that's one.
As was Balto. Yeah, there was a little bit of computer work in Balto, but not much.
Balto. And then Prince of Egypt was a mix of 2D and, like groundbreaking technology that you guys used. Then Time Machine was a live action special effects film. Then you have Mars Needs Mom, which is motion capture. So it's like completely, different styles of films that you have directed. How is that do you feel ever that transition, especially on Mars Needs Mom, because like completely different? Did you feel intimidated by that you're working on completely new technology, or was it because you're not really, I mean, you're kind of used to it with the animation, but it was still a little bit different. You're still in this warehouse with dots on people's faces and their, bodies.
I have to say that the mocap thing was a joyous experience. It's funny. I found live action was very, very stressful because you're always trying to make your day. You're trying to work out how to cover, you've got a couple of pages you've got to shoot today. How am I going to break that down and get that in the number of setups I can actually physically, get done in the day? And so you're constantly kind of recalibrating, recalculating, trying to figure it out. And that can really get in the way of, things like getting involved in the actor's performance. And it can really get in the way of spontaneity. And the thing that's amazing about mocap is because you are capturing the entire 3-dimensional scene, once you've got a take, you've got that take from every angle you could possibly want. So all the filmmaking choices about, camera moves and wide or close shots or lens choices and all those kind of things, and indeed lighting, all of that you push to later. I mean, it's the ultimate kind of we'll fix it in post. It's, that becomes an animation process, which I was very comfortable with. I mean, I actually hadn't directed a full 3D animated movie, but I'd been around enough of them to know a lot about how it all worked. And so felt pretty confident about that stage. But the great thing about mocap is now you're on stage with the actors and all you're doing is getting the performance and you're working with the actors. And it was wonderful because you could do like, okay, we do the straight version that we wrote. And then it's like, guys, if you want to ad lib a bit, have a bit of fun with it, loosen it up. If you've got some other ideas you want to throw in, go for it. And the actors loved that because it was just such freedom. It was a freedom to play.
Yeah.
And Wendy, you were on set, I'm assuming most of the time, if not all the time, when Simon was directing.
Yeah.
She was a set mom.
Set mom, right? So tell me, what was your daily activity like, and maybe before take, after take, during take, like what were you, more or less, like as a set mom, if that's what you want to call it. What were your daily activities like?
I did. I kind of fielded a lot of people. So, if people wanted to come and talk to Simon, they would talk to me because he's busy talking to the actors or sorting out some problem. And so they'd tell me what they needed, and then I could, okay, you need to go and see this person, send him off in the right direction.
Is it a good time to talk to Simon or not?
Yes, there was a lot of that. Yes, actually, the director is very much a sort of, he is the holy man on set, and quite often the director will have an assistant, which I guess was kind of my.
You effectively, I didn't have an assistant per se on the show.
Yeah.
I was going to say, so you were like an AD almost, basically.
Yeah. But yeah. And I also, there was one time when I actually got to, I didn't exactly act, but I was invited to go and stand and be on the receiving end of something that Dan Fogler had to emote. And I have to say, because I wasn't wearing any dots, so I could stand anywhere on set. So I just went up and stood on the set, and he then delivered. I can't remember what the scene was, but it was very emotional.
It was the stuff down in the
that's
sort
right,
of
where he breaks down.
And he breaks down, and we actually kind of hear about his backstory. And
and I'm not an actor, so I just stood there as someone that he could deliver his lines to give him a line. And wow, standing there and just receiving this onslaught of emotion from this actor. I mean, Dan is spectacular. I've always been in awe of him, but just being in that moment and receiving this fire
firing line.
Like, oh my God. I was practically in tears, and he was the one who was having the emotional breakdown. So, you know.
Did that by any chance give you an acting bug?
No. Oh, hell no. Although now I teach, and teaching is a bit like acting, so.
Yeah, great. Okay, so now that you're working on the set and you have the cast and you're going through different scenes, what was the most? And I get it, like with motion capture, like you can fix pretty much everything in post in terms of different angles. But what was the most challenging scene that you guys had to go through, or Simon yourself as a director, and then later as we'll call you AD or mom on the set? Is that each of you, what are some of the challenges that you had to go through on a scene or in a situation, and how did you guys overcome it?
I think the rhythm of it actually became very comfortable and very relaxed. I think probably the most stressful was literally just doing like the first couple of scenes, because I've directed, but this is a whole different kind of experience. And then there's also a certain amount of kind of everyone's looking at you going, okay, what kind of director is this guy going to be? But I honestly can say there wasn't any part of it that was a kind of was difficult. It was just a genuine lot of fun to do.
We made a lot of friends. It was
great. I mean, a lot of people
became a real family. And I think a lot of the stunties and the actors, because they come from Avatar and Christmas Carol, they all knew each other anyway. So we were already a part of a crew and a group that we knew. Yeah,
a lot of because you have like the principal actors, but then you have a group of kind of, if you like, utility players who do all the other parts. It's kind of like a repertory theatre or something. And
because Julene is in Avatar.
Julene is actually on camera in Avatar. But I don't know who else from but certainly most of our utility players have been on Christmas Carol together.
Oh yeah.
Right. But it was I think the thing that saddens me most about the lack of performance of the film is not that I'm hurt from an ego point of view, but actually I would just really love to have got the band back together. It was so much fun. I actually I used to be pretty much the first person on set in the morning and the last person to leave. Part of that was because I had appalling allergies at the time, and when I was on set, the air on set is completely filtered, like ultra HEPA filtered, so because of all the technology, and so I'd get on set and my allergies would just go, they'd disappear, and I'd walk off set and just a ton of mucus would suddenly arrive. So I used to get there at like 7:30 in the morning and just sit on set the entire time.
Just breathing
and in. Never went to my trailer or anything like that.
So I've seen a lot of behind the scene footage of Avatar, of Monster House, Christmas Carol, all these Mocap films, Tintin, Ready Player One, your film as well. And it just seems very less chaotic. Like there's not that big of a crew. You're just in this environment where everything is controlled, and did that, especially working on Time Machine, which you said you had a lot of challenges on. Like, was that something easier to deal with? I think you kind of answered that, but is it because of the more controlled environment? It's a little bit more easygoing.
Well, yes, it is. There's not as many things to be juggling. So you're not trying to deal with the camera department and the lighting and all that at the same time. That's all set. All, the 200 motion capture cameras are all just bolted to the gantries, and that's there.
Right.
I mean, there was still there was still quite a lot of energy on set because you change over to a new like a new setup. Okay, we're now going to be in the caverns underneath Mars, and they got all the pieces built, and they're out in the warehouse, and the grips have just come in with power drills and
falling to the floor.
And we had a clock on the wall that been something that actually Bob Z had set up, which was this countdown clock, and the crew basically had 15 minutes to change out the set to an entirely new set. I mean, it's amazing, but because all the sets are pre-built and you only have the set pieces that the actors physically interact with, so you have as little obstruction of the cameras as possible. But yeah, so there was a lot of energy because the guys would pride themselves in being able to do this and get the whole thing changed out that fast. And then you get into doing a take, and there isn't all of the camera pre-roll and stuff. It's like, okay, very often I do multiple takes in a row, and we just keep on, keep the stream going. There was the one thing that did kind of slow things down is there's the dreadful T pose.
Oh, yes.
That every actor has to come in and stand, in this kind of absolutely bolt upright position like that, so that they can get a read on where all their dots are. And every time the actor leaves and comes back on set, they have to be resampled in. So that was kind of a tedious thing. But compared
it really
to
wasn't that long.
compared
it's not like, you're changing locations or anything.
Well, and when you're doing live action, every setup, like the makeup and hair people come in and they're just fussing and it's like, can we just please go?
Yeah.
I know it needs to be done, and I know it's frustrating, but so it was, you're free of so much of that stuff. You're just getting on. It's kind of like, it's like black box theatre. It's like we've got a chair and a table and a sofa, and we're just going to do the scene, and everything's in your imagination.
Does it feel like theater, you think, when you're actually
because you're not, I mean, there's a certain consciousness of kind of what the camera angles are going to be. So I was aware of how I was going to shoot it when we come to do the camera work. So you think about like which side of the set you're going to really be looking at, and you work so your actors are aware of that and are playing open to that side. That's like kind of being on stage. It's like being aware of where your audience is.
So Wendy, one of the things that I really liked in the film was there was a line in the beginning. Joan Cusack delivered it. It was, "Speaking of trash, have you cleaned up your room?" I thought that was such a great line because every boy's room, and I see it with my son too.
Boys, we have two girls, and they're living with us. I mean, even they're in their 20s now, and their rooms are just
bomb sites.
Yeah. Okay, so it's different with us, maybe because but in any case, but I thought that line was really great, and also the scene when Joanne's character has an argument with their son, and the tears in those eyes when she's trying to close the door, that was really, really powerful.
Joan's actual original performance was devastating. I mean, she really brought it. That's not a thing that we kind of added in afterwards. It was okay, how are we going to reproduce the thing that Joan did? Because her heartbreaking performance in that moment was like, I don't know how we're going to get that to look as convincing when we come to do the digital version of her.
Yeah, no, it was great. I absolutely loved it. And your team that you had, like your cinematographer Robert Presley, and then your editor Wayne, I think it was Wayne Warman.
Yeah, I'd worked with him on Time Machine as well.
Okay, so he worked on it with him. So just talking to me about especially, obviously you had a team and everything, but let's focusing on cinematography and post-production. And Wendy, you can chime in this on too. What was like that, and working with Robert, and obviously, like you said, all the cameras are rigged up and everything, so you don't have to worry about those angles. But what was that process like?
This is a you question.
It's more of a virtual thing. Robert's, I have a lot of opinions about kind of camera usage and how storytelling through camera works. So Robert's principal job was lighting and working with IMD to kind of figure out how to make the lighting look like real lighting and how to position those lights to do the things we wanted to do. A lot of the camera work, actually, it's funny, they built a rig so that Robert could actually, drive a camera with the wheels, which he used quite a lot on Christmas Carol. They also had this kind of little handheld block that had motion captured dots on it that you could use after you shot the scene. You could have the scene, as it were, in virtual space around you, and they had a rig that could define where the camera was and where it was angled.
Oh, neat.
You could fly this block of wood
cool.
around or through the scene, and you could blow the scene up to any size you wanted. So you could have it small and do a huge crane shot, or you could expand the scene out and get right in and do a little detailed thing around an actor's face. But actually, even that, I found quite quickly that the best way of working was that Wayne would put together kind of the best takes of based on the sort of video, because we shoot video at the same time, and he'd collect that stuff together, and then they'd make a kind of a 3D rough throw together where they took the camera that had been shooting the dots on the actors' faces. They take that video stream and kind of paste it onto a really blocky 3D model, so we could see kind of where physically the actors were going to be. It didn't have a lot of the detail and nuance, but it was a layout thing. And I would look at that with Wayne, and I just, we discuss it, and I just thumbnail the ideas and hand those over to the layout crew, and they would then on the computer do those camera moves. And that became very much an interactive thing between me and Wayne, where because he is, he's actually a very good filmmaker himself, and he knows how it's going to cut together, obviously, and we have very similar sensibilities about kind of what we think shots tell us and how they work. And so we kind of discuss it, and it would be a thing of like, can I thumbnail this as fast as we're talking it out? And then we'd throw it. So literally, our editing room was next door to the layout room, so we just go out and find out whoever's free, give them those shots, and then like an hour or two later, they'd bring the shots back, and we could see how they cut together. It was just great.
Yeah. Wayne and Simon and sometimes me were very in tune with the rhythm of cutting as well. So, Wayne would be playing a scene, and he'd go and he'd be saying, okay, so I'm going to cut, and Simon and I and Wayne would all go, now.
Although actually, I've got to say, Wayne has that ability that good editors have, where I'd look at a thing and I go, hey, cut about there, and he'd always cut about 16 frames earlier than where I'd said. And he'd be right, and like I know that if I were cutting the thing myself, I'd cut it and it would look loose and baggy, and I'd go in and trim it a little tighter, and it'd still look a little loose, and I go in and trim it.
Eventually, you'd get
after about 3 or 4 times, I'd get to where Wayne just goes to straight away, bang.
That's
why he's an editor. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so true what you just said about editing on your own, right? Like the first film that I ever directed was a feature documentary, and because we had a very low budget, I just decided to do editing on my own. It came out okay, but when I, moving on, now that I have an editor, it just, like, there's some things that you don't see that an editor sees, especially when you're so into it as a director, because, you have a complete objective point of view, and it makes a huge lot of difference. Like you said, 16 frames make a big deal in convincing an emotion or any kind of message or whatever you're trying to do, it makes a huge deal.
But also the overall rhythm of the movie, and in which, again, Wayne is tremendously good at. It's funny. One of the reasons why I started working with Wayne is I met a whole bunch of editors on Time Machine, and I liked Wayne a lot. But also, he'd just done the first Charlie's Angels, the McGee Charlie's Angels, and it's interesting, if you watch that movie really critically, you realize, oh, quite a lot of this movie isn't actually terribly good, but it's incredibly well paced, so it just flies through, and you're having a great time, and it rolls along, and I realized, oh, that's really good understanding of rhythm. That's a guy who knows how to pace a movie. And he'd done for his sins, he'd done a Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie, which I got to say was horrible, but again, the rhythm of the movie worked so well that it played. And so I thought, okay, this guy's going to save my ass a whole lot of times. I want him on my picture.
No, he's done some great stuff. I mean, I don't think he was a primary editor on Last of Mohicans, but he was one of the editors that came at the end, maybe just to kind of fix the pacing of the film and whatnot. But yeah, no, it's 100% true. And Wendy, as being on the set, you're kind of like going through everything, like, looking at the cuts, looking at being in the editing room. And in terms of the cast, even though, Simon as a director is working with the cast, but what kind of interaction you had with the cast to make them feel a little comfortable? Because I'm kind of like that too, that, if my wife and I don't really work together that much, I mean, she has her own thing, but sometimes if she would help me on the set, she is the kind of person knows how to, talk to people, and when I'm not under stress, when I'm under stress, or when I'm really, really busy. How was your communication with actors? And do you think, and I'm pretty sure it did, but do you feel that it made things a lot more easier for them to feel comfortable in this kind of technology and working on the film?
I hope so. We had a lot of running jokes, some of them a little blue. Stephen Kieran and I would rewrite songs together and just crack each other up to the point where we're literally doubled up weeping with laughter, somewhere behind the stage. There was one time we completely rewrote all of the David Bowie's hits, and I can't remember any of them now, but I just remember literally clutching my sides, and I was laughing so
trying
hard.
not to make noise and interrupt the tape that's going on the stage, because it was such a hassle to kind of go in and out of the stage, because you had to like recalibrate each time. The actors tended to come and sit on stage, and they put a cover on to cover over the dots so they wouldn't upset the cameras, but they just hang out on stage. It was easier than going back to their trailers and then having to come back again and spend 10 minutes being recalibrated and coming in. So yeah,
there was a lot of just
hanging out and just chatting about stuff.
There was a lovely guy called Ben.
Ben Guthrie.
Ben. Was it? No, Ben Art Department, Ben.
Yeah.
And he decided that because he'd come from Avatar and he'd been on Christmas Carol and he hadn't had a good time in the art department. He's like,
oh, he was a props guy.
Props.
No, he actually came to us saying,
this is my last show. I'm out of.
I'm only doing this because I promised I would do this show. Frankly, I'm done with this whole movie business.
I don't want to be in the movie business anymore. It's just I just don't like the environment. And he and I actually became quite good friends. And at the end of Mars, he said, "You know what? I'm going to stick around. There are, this has been such a great show, and the people on the show have been such a family and so kind and supportive that I'm going to carry on." So
I think his name,
nice.
Yeah.
His name was Benjamin Fetter. Peter.
Cool. I have to look it up. I'm sorry, I just remember it was Ben.
Yeah, I'm just looking at IMDb. It says costume designer, so I'm assuming that was.
He was props.
He was props.
Okay.
Props. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of running jokes. I mean, Seth had running jokes with everybody.
Oh my God, yes.
Seth is incredibly good at just being friends with everybody in the show.
Yeah.
I remember actually saying to him one time, like, Seth, dude, you've been kind of a big name in this business for quite a long time. Why aren't you an asshole? Because, like, and he said, honestly, I love doing this and I want to get asked back. And so I just figure the nicer I am to everybody, the more likely they are to ask me to come back and do it again. And I thought, oh,
that's a life
God
lesson.
bless you. Yeah, absolutely.
That's such a simple, common sense thing for people to do. And I don't know what happens to a lot of people, not just actors. I mean, I think even people behind cameras or different crew members, it just kind of sometimes gets to people's head. But yeah, I mean, being nice and being kind and being simple pays off in the long term for sure.
But do you remember I think it was actually the Mocap head rig guys built throwing stars out of Velcro.
No,
because you're wearing a Velcro suit, because they attach all the dots with Velcro. They actually built these shuriken throwing stars that you could throw, and they would stick to the actors' costumes. And
shuriken fights.
And there were shuriken fights, and at one point, a whole bunch of Disney executives came round right in the middle of one of these shuriken fights.
Oh wow!
Okay, guys, let's pack it in now.
We need to look like adults. Yes.
And one thing that I really enjoyed in the film, guys, is if you want to call, I'm not sure if it was production design or art direction or a bit of both, just the aesthetics of the environment, right? The spaceships, Gribbles via a ship, as well as the forest scene and everything. What was, how involved were you in that? Obviously, that came in a form of storyboards beforehand, and then obviously in post when you were rendering stuff and all that. So just talk to me through that process.
That's a lot of thanks to Doug Chang, who was a production designer, who was basically the head cheese, the big creative guy at Image Movers Digital, and he of course comes from Star Wars. So the sci-fi stuff is just so completely in his blood, and he and a bunch of development artists produced just a slew of stuff, a whole range of kind of different things. Early on, while we were still in writing and sort of giving them rough versions of the script, and so we'd go through and just kind of pick the stuff that worked, fit together, fit with kind of what we were thinking, and so it was sort of a process of refining down. But yeah, mostly we had just a wealth of options, and the guys produced just gorgeous artwork. And there's some things you looked at and went, well, that's beautiful, it doesn't fit with everything else we're doing, but man, it's a beautiful piece of artwork. So yeah, it was essentially their sensibilities, and we just got to cherry pick it. It was wonderful.
Yeah, and I loved I mean, this came out 11 years ago, but the facial expressions, the movements was quite impressive even for its time period. And especially Gribble's character, to me, he looked as real as a human being. Just the way the movement was.
The difficulty with mocap, and I don't know, you could probably do it now, but certainly where we were then is that dreadful thing that people call the uncanny valley, where you get something that looks very, very real, and then it only requires the slightest little thing to feel a wee tiny bit fake, and suddenly it's kind of weird and off-putting. I mean, essentially, zombie movies work on the same principle, that people are bothered by the uncanny valley. This is clearly a human being, but they're acting kind of weird and moving in a weird way, and all our alarm bells go off. It's kind of in the lizard brain that there's something that reacts to that. And so I think where we were with the technology, there'd be just occasional moments that would let it down, and it's kind of like you pop a balloon. It's which is painful and sad to admit, but I think in some ways we would have been smarter to go more cartoony. In retrospect, I think what they did with Monster House, Gil Kenan did with Monster House, was very smart. He said, look, we've particularly as he was working a low budget, they weren't going to have hair simulation and stuff like that. He said, we're going to go cartoony because that gets us away from any kind of question about, well, why doesn't the hair look more realistic? And early discussions with Bob said, well, if you make Earth look real, then we'll believe that Mars is real. And he had a good argument of like, make Earth as real as you possibly can, because then we'll believe the Mars environment. But I don't know, in retrospect, it might have been smarter to go kind of more caricatured, more cartoony. I mean, in point of fact, there is actually a great deal of caricature in the performance. I mean, we did a number of tests where we do like, okay, this is 1-to-1. The movements of the face are literally moving the 3D model 1-to-1, and then, you know, going up in increments. And I think we were at about 130, 140%, you know, kind of pushing beyond, you know, taking whatever movement and making it that much more. But yeah, there were some parts of it were incredibly successful, and partly because Dan Fogler's performance is such that he translates incredibly well.
Elizabeth.
And Elizabeth was great. And I
job.
think is also because those characters were more extreme characters. They allowed for more caricature, and that worked better. So yeah, again, if we could only get the band back together, what we would do better.
So Wendy, when you guys finished the film, right? I'm assuming you guys did screening, like test screenings and just audience feedback and, you know, survey and all that. Talk to me about that entire process, the amount of feedback you guys got from the executives, from the audience, and the implementation of that or not so implementation of that.
It was a weird time.
It was very strange, yes. There was a lot of political stuff going on.
The leadership of Disney changed while we were making the film. And after we'd finished shooting, but while we were still in post-production. And there was some question about Bob Zemeckis' whole deal with Disney and kind of the terms of it. And the people who came in,
their marketing team completely changed.
That changed over.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was kind of a messy thing. I mean, I'm very grateful that we were allowed to finish the film, because they could have just said, okay, we're going to axe it and stop it right now. I don't think that crew understood. I don't think that team of people really understood what the movie was. Dick Cook had been the one who greenlit it and had really liked the whole thing. They kind of, I think they were expecting something that was going to be a cutesy little, you know, cartoon, you know, joke fest. And what they have is more dramatic, and oh my God, the mum's going to die, and the son is crying his eyes out, and so on. I don't think they really knew what they were dealing with, what they wanted to do with it, and they hadn't got a clue really how they wanted to sell it. And I think, in all honesty, there were some interesting political things that were going on,
well beyond our pay grade,
which were yes, so far beyond our pay grade that I think there wasn't, without naming names, there wasn't a lot of support for the movie in the higher echelons of the Disney management.
So again, you don't have to answer this, and I'm not looking for any names or controversies, but when you said the marketing team changed, right? So normally for any film, even back then, the marketing team would start to come on board in the very, you know, middle or early stages, just to kind of get a plan going and execution, how we're going to do this, when we're going to do this. So was that happening with the previous team, and it stopped and nothing sort of happened afterwards, or less happened afterwards?
It was kind of good.
The new sort of Disney people who were in charge of marketing were trying out a sort of a much more
boutique-y
viral,
kind of,
boutique-y, you know,
getting the early days of social media.
So through social media entirely, rather than doing the big advertising campaigns. And it was something they were trying out,
and it was
we were a guinea pig, I guess.
Yeah, it was a new team, and they'd only done like 1 or 2 movies at all.
I don't think they'd even done movies.
Yeah, prior to us, and I mean, it's interesting that at that time Pixar were using their own marketing team. They refused to use Disney's marketing team,
and that marketing team didn't last long. So,
it's funny that I when I watched the film, right, like even when I watch something new, or even if I haven't seen something in a while, I had completely forgotten about this film in terms of the story or what the box office was, or successful or not. So I decided to watch it first, and then I, Googled the people's reaction, and the box office numbers, obviously now that makes more sense, what you were just telling me, because for a Disney movie to open like that, or to have that kind of a box office is like something unheard of.
The other problem was that the critics, a lot of them responded to the whole Uncanny Valley thing, which they didn't like. And when you get the sites which compile, the critical reviews and say, okay, 30% fresh, or whatever, they're really just doing kind of a bottom line of, they're not dissecting it in terms of this was enjoyable, but I didn't like the look of the thing, or so you end up with this kind of number score, which doesn't in any way kind of reflect the nature of the movie.
No.
And
because in the screenings we were getting really good responses to the characters.
Our cinema score was actually pretty decent.
Yeah.
In terms of when people had been asked after the movie, did you enjoy it? So we were kind of killed by the by the Rotten Tomatoes number without without any analysis of where that number comes from. And trouble is, you look and go, shall I go and I don't know anything about this movie. Oh, Rotten Tomatoes says it's only like this. Let's not bother.
But I also think Disney brand is such a huge brand, even if Rotten Tomatoes reviews were bad, in terms of I also think what you just mentioned about the marketing team, I think that had a hand in it too.
Disney is certainly pretty good at kind of ramming things down people's throats and saying you do want to see this. They didn't do. There's also, and I throw this out not really as an excuse, but it was the weekend that the Fukushima disaster happened in Japan as well, and frankly I didn't want to go to the cinema that weekend either. So that's a small additional thing.
It's a combination of things, right? And also going back to what you said about Rotten Tomatoes, I think Rotten Tomatoes, there was a time for me at least when I used to sort of check it out, but now I don't, because there have been so many cases where I would like the film and I'll go to Rotten Tomatoes and it will have terrible reviews, and vice versa. Like I would okay, this was garbage, and I'll go to Rotten Tomatoes and it will be 80%. So everybody's taste is different now, right? And it's not that, like you said, it's like oranges and apples. So it's not really fair. And I just wanted to know. I mean, I know as a filmmaker, when obviously box office is not everything, but it is a reflection of audience not accepting your film for whatever reason that is. And it obviously hurts anybody, even if it was Steven Spielberg or Robert Zemeckis. So how did you guys deal with that? Like when the numbers came in and everything, like what was that process like for you guys?
Yeah,
it was pretty horrible.
Grieving. It
was grieving.
I had a good friend of ours, Tim Johnson, who's directed a bunch of movies for DreamWorks. He said that best. He said, I love making movies, I just hate releasing them. Because it's always horrible. And even if you have the number one movie for the weekend, then it gets knocked off the following weekend, and it's like, your heart breaks all over again. So it's very painful actually. I completely sympathize with the people who don't read any reviews and just kind of, in fact,
But there's no escaping it. I mean, even if you say, "Oh, I'm not going to read the reviews,"
you still hear about it and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I know a number of people who will go away for the weekend when their movie opens. They won't be in town for that weekend.
I think Spielberg and Lucas did that when Star Wars and Close Encounters came out, and that's where Raiders' idea was conceived. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you need to stay away from. But at the same time, even 11 years ago was different. Now it's even worse. Like, you have everything at your fingertips more than it was even 11 years ago.
Oh yeah. No, trying to do a cinema release of a movie now is incredibly difficult. I don't envy that at all, because I mean, I'm aware of it in discussions we have, like, shall we go and see this? It's like, I don't know, is this a movie that you have to see in the cinema, or is it a movie that's going to be fine to watch streaming?
Yeah.
And the trouble is, those kind of, I mean, there's the big spectacular things like Dungeons and Dragons or Top Gun. You got to go and see those in the movie theater. But then there's a lot of the smaller dramas and stuff that's going to work just fine at home. And I hate myself for saying that, but at the same time,
before COVID, we would go every weekend. We go and see a movie at the cinema.
At least
one.
Now,
But do you think, now this is a very general question, do you think that's because we have more streaming options, or tickets are very expensive, or is it just COVID has kicked into our habit of just kind of chilling out and relaxing at home?
I think for me it's COVID. That changed it. That changed it. And now it's, I can stay home and.
But also the availability. I mean, this is the difficulty of, particularly if you do a simultaneous release, cinema and streaming. It's like, really, am I really going to travel down the road and buy tickets and blah blah blah?
Also, our local cinema used to be the ArcLight, and so that was lovely. But now,
it's Regal's still decent, but I hear they're going to close as well. So, but I mean, what was the recent Disney release where they released, but we all knew it was going to be coming out in streaming in 4 weeks' time or something. So,
Strange World.
Strange World.
It might have been Strange World, which actually our elder daughter, who was another of the Mars hatchlings, is now actually a production assistant and worked on Strange World.
Cool.
But it's funny. She went to college to do kind of live action filmmaking, and after spending a bunch of time on sets and having a few kind of working gigs on sets, but also having done an internship at Stupid Buddy Studios, she just realized, I like animation studios a whole lot more, and I like the rhythm of work and the way you get to know people for a longer period of time, and so she just realized that
craft the film and the story,
and you also get a certain amount of your work-life balance is healthier when you're on live action films. That's all you do. You are 16 hours a day on that film, and you work like crazy for a couple of months, and then suddenly there's nothing. And now you're searching for another job and desperately calling around trying to get another gig. And so actually the continuity of animation is a lot more fun. But anyway, so she worked on Strange World. But I think that suffered very much from the fact that you knew it was going to be available on Disney Plus in a month's time. So really, do we want to go out and see it?
Yeah, and I was actually surprised even after, I think the second or third wave of COVID, like films like, I'm specifically talking about Pixar films. What was that film? Big Red.
Turning Red.
Turning Red, yes.
Turning Red. And so many other films, they just kind of released them on Disney Plus. And Turning Red, I mean, it's based in my hometown, Toronto. Like all the locations that they showed, like I remember them like from 30 years ago. And I was like, so I wanted to go see that movie in the theater, and they released it on Disney Plus. But again, it's business too, right? Numbers, if it's what's gonna work where in terms of money, more ROI where, and all that stuff.
I don't know. The whole business side of it. I haven't directed a film that's gone to streaming. I've been attached to a few that were going to, but not got to the point where the details of the deal worked out. I think there is a whole different construction of how residuals are derived and that kind of thing, because there just isn't. It's like back in the day when things used to get released on video and DVD. actually trying to find out what the revenue from those DVDs and video sales was quite hard. They did not publish. They kind of, they give a table of which one was the best, but they wouldn't actually say how much anything was making.
Yeah.
That's even more so with streaming, where you have not a clue how much. I mean, you just have to take their word for it.
But also, I mean, Matt Damon, I was watching his interview. He said that back in the day, if there was a small but movie that was not going to generate a lot of box office, and executives knew that, they would still go ahead with it because they knew there would be income through VHS and DVD, rentals, purchases, and all that. But that is sort of completely gone now. So nobody takes those chances of making films like English Patient, or
yes and no, because of course there's I mean, if you start going through the extensive back catalogue of the Netflixes of this world, you find an awful lot of films that you look at and go, that was made in 2019. I didn't even hear about that, or 2021. Mm-hmm. And they're all these kind of lower budget, some of them very good. But things that quite a lot of them are not. But so in a way, there is kind of a world there for the lower budget filler movie.
But I find that maybe it's because of the marketing. Like, back in the day, any small movie that would come out, like Sling Blade, I don't know if you remember, that came out in the late 90s. Billy Bob Thornton. You would know about it. People would. I remember knowing about it. It came out in like 3 theaters, and then it came out in like 20 theaters and 100. Now, like all those small films that you're talking about, you're right. Like I would find something. Oh, there was a movie with this star and that star 5 years ago. I've never even heard of it. Like you just don't know about it the way you used to, maybe because it was in newspapers or what it was. But yeah, it's just totally different now.
It may be a function of there's also more stuff getting made. I mean,
that too.
So,
go on.
No, go ahead.
What are your future projects like together, whether it is or anything that you're working on that you're able to talk about?
I think my role, I've stepped into teaching now, so I'm sort of out of the writing.
What do you teach?
I actually teach costume and fashion design. That's my other passion.
Wendy's had a number of careers, and one of them was actually making costumes. She made costumes for West End shows for a while when we were in London.
Obviously before we came out here. So my role as writing partner has now been taken over by our younger daughter. So Simon and Tegan are now writing together.
We're actually on like our 3rd script together now.
Yeah.
It started off as a thing where, because Tegan's trying to get into animation as well. She's a story artist, and
right.
And while she was at college, she'd done a writing course, and this had come up. She'd come up with an idea as just a pitch to her class, but had been such a good idea and had been so well received in her class that I said to her, okay, let's actually, over the summer holiday, let's structure this out. I can try and impart some of what I know about how to put a film together. We'll card it all out, lay it out on boards, and figure out the story, actually flesh it out fully and go through that whole experience. And so we did that, and then realized that our main character was the wrong character and rewrote it, and eventually came up with a script that was quite a decent draft. And then I thought, well, okay, the next stage of this is you put it out to a bunch of industry people that people like Brenda Chapman, who I did Prince of Egypt with, who's a superb writer, and get their notes, which will be painful. But, this is a thing you've got to go through. So we did that. Got some great and painful notes, did a rewrite and several rewrites, and then it was sort of, well, now we've got this script, maybe we ought to actually take this out and pitch it. So I storyboarded the opening sequence and cut it together with music and sound and stuff, so it actually a proper animatic of the first 4 minutes of the movie. And then we also did a bunch of artwork, so that we had a lookbook, a kind of pitch document, and pitched it out to a bunch of studios. I mean, we knew going in it was not a thing that was likely to get picked up. It was kind of too far out there as an idea. It's basically the Battle of the Alamo, but with an air force of giant winged creatures, essentially giant bats. And it's much more of an action adventure film than an animated movie. But anyway, on the back of that, Tegan and I have continued to write stuff, and we've got we have a script that you still haven't read yet.
I know, I will read it this afternoon.
And another one that working. So I got a bunch of things I'm in the process of trying to write, and I also kind of get attached to scripts from time to time. There was a really terrific one that actually only just fell through about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, which was actually about the making of the original Charlie Brown Christmas special, Peanuts Christmas special, back in 1995. And it was one of those things where my agent, I think, had sent it to me because, like, well, you know about animation, you might like this. and my first reaction was, Peanuts? Really? Why would I care about this? And I started reading. It's one of those scripts where you get 4 pages in and then you just can't put it down. It's superb, the writing. And I met with the producers and they were great. And the whole thing was all working incredibly well, and they got financing. In fact, they got financiers who said, you're asking for 10 million, but we think you need 15, so we're going to give you 15. It was like, and fell at the final hurdle, and the family decided that the Schultz family decided they had something that was too similar that they were trying to develop themselves. And yeah, that's one of the few times when I'd actually got to a point of thinking, this is going to happen, it's going to happen, and then it didn't. That's the story of 99% of things in Hollywood. There's all these things, deals that get put together and then don't happen. So yeah, I've been attached to so many things. I don't tend to hold my breath anymore, but this one, I was holding my breath. Yes. Anyway, it may come back. You never know. But
just one last question, and that's for Wendy. Wendy, which Simon was just talking about, 99% of the projects that don't get made, and then aside from being a writer, as a wife, and then being in the family together, how have you become sort of used to that kind of thing too? Well, it will happen when it will happen, or is it still sometimes is it difficult to deal with?
Oh, you get used to it, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, now and again a script will come in and I'll be like, this is so good. I want to see this on the screen. Even if you don't make it, I still want to see it.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, well, how did that get dropped? And then this piece of rubbish, I'm not going to mention films that we've seen recently.
No, I know.
Right, yeah. I know. That's extraordinary. And there are scripts that I remember reading 20 years ago, but I still think, boy, why didn't that get made? And very often the answer is because it's now gone through so many rewrites that the negative cost that is trailing around after that script, if you wanted to take that script and make it at a studio, the studio who's already got it will say, well, we spent $2.5 million on that, so you need to reimburse us. You need to buy that.
There was that wonderful one about the boy raised by whales. I love that.
Yeah. I would still make today if I got the chance. But yeah, it's trailing about a $3 or $4 million negative cost. So turnaround cost never going to happen, and it's a shame because it was such a touching film.
Yeah. So there's lots of those.
It's insane how, as important a film business is, how that kind of ends up destroying art, but yet it's the same thing that saves art. So on that note, if there's anything else you guys want to add on, I'd be more than happy to. But I'm pretty much good in terms of with my questions.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, I think that's about it. I got to say, in summary about Marsden's Mums, though, I think I still look back at that as being probably the highlight of my entire professional career in terms of, we got to work with one of my all-time film heroes, Bob Zemeckis, and learn at his feet. I mean, he literally guided us. We got to work with a bunch of really great actors many of whom we've remained friends with since. And the whole experience was genuinely joyous. I think there were about 3 or 4 really horrible days, particularly days when we were up against a brick wall in writing. It's like, what on earth are we going to do? We had a couple of days where it's like we can't solve something, and we spent literally 2 whole days banging our head against a
did a lot of walking.
Yeah. but generally it was such a great experience that I would jump at the opportunity to do that again. It was just so much fun. And the feeling of you wake up in the morning at 6 a.m. and it's like, I want to get to set as soon as possible because I want to keep doing this.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've worked on some other films I've enjoyed working on, but for just unalloyed pleasure for about 2 years, it was just fantastic.
And I think that's one thing that a lot of us, you don't realize it at the time, especially, when your film was released and whatever the feelings that you guys are going through. But now that, the experience, that element of experience of working on that set, and then the people that you worked with, at the end of the day, I think, in the long run, that is just so much more important, no matter how in that moment that you may feel. And you're mentioning that, right? So which is
well, I mean, I can give you a very very clear sort of metric of this. Right at the time when we were about to do the deal to write Marsney's Mums, Jeffrey Katzenberg offered me the opportunity to co-direct with Jenny Nelson the second Kung Fu Panda movie. First Kung Fu Panda movie had been a huge hit. Jen and I had worked very closely in story. She'd been head of story on the show, and we actually there's a credit on the front end of the movie which is about the action sequences, because we did all the action sequences basically, and so Jeffrey sat me down and said, "You and Jen take the movie; it's yours." And I would still go back now and make the choice to do Marsney's Mums rather than the much more successful Kung Fu Panda, which has continued as a franchise. I, in fact, have just worked on Kung Fu Panda 4 as a storyboard artist. I would still go back, knowing everything I know, I would still go back and do Marsney's Mums, because the 2 to 3 years of doing that was such a positive experience. And yep, there was a couple of weeks of just horrible experience when the movie came out, but
the job is making movies. It's the release is painful or thrilling and then painful, but the job is making them, and that I think is the most important thing to try and remember.
Don't mortgage your life on the hope of an opening weekend, because making a movie is going to take you 2 or 3 years. You better be enjoying that.
And I think it teaches you more about yourself than anything else, aside from making the film. Like, you discover yourself every day, at least from my experience. Like, I learn more about myself every day, that I'm able to do this, or I have the ability to do this, or I can pull that off. And I think and then obviously the people that you meet and the experiences, and that at the end of the day is everything.
Well said.
Thank you so much, guys, for your time. Really appreciate it. Really had a great time talking to you, Wendy, as well.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
It was a pleasure. Likewise. Simon, we should do it again, and maybe we can get Wendy on for Time Machine as well.
Oh my gosh. I wasn't really very involved with Time Machine. Yes.
No, you just picked up the pieces.
No, definitely we should do something again, and I hope to chat with you again, Simon. And it was very nice meeting you, Wendy, and best of luck with your kids and in their career choices and all that.
Yes, and yours.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.